Nobody warns you about the silence. For years the work was loud, breakthroughs, grief, the unmistakable sense you were finally getting somewhere. Then one day it stops. The intensity fades, the insights go quiet. And in that stillness, strange signs surface. Unexplainable patterns, people drifting away without a fight, a buried part of you beginning to speak again. Most panic here, assuming regression, convinced they've lost the thread. Carl Jung understood the opposite. The silence isn't an end. It's the moment the work stops happening to you and starts happening as you. What feels like the end is the first day of a stranger, deeper stage. Here is the lie that makes people abandon the work at its exact point of completion. That transformation must feel loud, that if you're not breaking down or breaking through, nothing is happening. So when the intensity fades, you assume growth stopped, and you either dig at healed wounds or walk away right before the real stage begins. You were taught to trust the noise and distrust the quiet, and the quiet was the point the entire time. You didn't find this video by accident. You're in the silence right now, or close to it. The loud years have stilled. Strange things have begun to stir at the edges of your life, and a quiet fear whispers you've lost the thread. You came looking for confirmation that you're not moving backward, and by the end of this, you'll have it. You'll understand exactly what the silence is, what the signs mean, and why the end of the loud work is a door opening onto a stage almost no one reaches, and even fewer recognize while standing in it. Jung isn't promising the universe starts sending you magic. He's revealing something far more precise. The patterns were always there. Your unintegrated psyche simply couldn't perceive them. When the internal war ends, your perception clears. The strange things aren't events being added to reality. They're what was always present, finally visible to eyes no longer narrowed by survival. That distinction is everything. Miss it, and you fall into fantasy. Grasp it, and you understand precisely what's happening to you. This is depth psychology applied to the stage after shadow work. The 4 signs: silence, patterns, drift, the return of something you buried, and the hard reversal where spiritual bypassing counterfeits arrival. By the end, you'll know whether you're entering the deeper stage or fooling yourself, because they look identical and only one is real. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Drop a big gun in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Let's start with the silence itself, because it's the first sign and the one that makes the most people quit right before the finish. For years, the work announced itself. Every session of real inner work produced something loud, a memory surfacing, a grief breaking open, an insight that rearranged how you understood your whole life. The intensity was the feedback. It told you something was moving. You came to associate transformation with that intensity, to trust that as long as it was loud, you were growing. And then it faded. The breakthroughs stopped arriving. The insights went quiet. The inner landscape that used to roil went still. And the stillness felt, at first, like nothing. Like the work had simply run out. Here's the uncomfortable truth about why the silence scares you. You'd become addicted to the intensity, not to the healing, to the drama of healing, the identity of the person in the middle of a profound transformation. The loud years gave you a story. I am doing deep work. I am becoming someone. And when the noise stopped, the story lost its fuel, and some part of you panicked, not because you'd stopped growing, but because you'd lost the constant dramatic confirmation that you were. You'd started to need the breakthroughs the way a lesser man needs applause. The silence didn't threaten your progress. It threatened your identity as someone in progress. Sit with that, because it's the beginning of the real stage. A great deal of what you called the work in the loud years was partly performance. For yourself, if no one else. The intensity felt like proof, and you leaned on it, which means the silence is the first time the work has ever asked you to trust it without the reward of feeling it. That's not a step back. That's the work maturing past the stage where it needed to be dramatic to be real. Now exhale, because here's the reframe. The silence is what completion feels like from the inside. The reason the breakthrough stopped is that the major excavation is done. The buried material has largely been surfaced, felt, and integrated, and there's simply less left screaming to be dug up. The quiet is not the absence of the work. It's the sound of a psyche that has stopped fighting itself. What you're mistaking for the engine dying is actually the engine reaching the smooth, silent speed it was being built toward the whole time. And in that silence, something new becomes audible, signs you couldn't perceive while the work was still loud. The first of them changes how you understand the way you move through your days. Here is the second sign, and it's the one Jung pointed at directly. The work stops happening to you and starts happening as you. In the loud years, the work was an event. You'd sit down to do it, to journal, to reflect, to confront the shadow, and then you'd get up and return to your life, carrying the insight like something you'd retrieved from a session. Growth was a thing you did, separate from ordinary living. That's the beginner's stage, and it's necessary, but it's not the destination. The destination is when the separation dissolves, when there is no longer a doing the work distinct from living your life, because the integrated awareness has become the operating system rather than an application you open. Here's the mechanism, and it's pure depth psychology. Everything you made conscious in the loud years, every buried pattern you dragged into the light, every trigger you traced to its root, required deliberate effort to hold at first. You had to consciously catch the old reaction, consciously choose the integrated response. It was manual, but consciousness, practiced long enough, becomes automatic. The catching yourself that used to take deliberate effort now happens on its own, beneath awareness. The way a skill you drilled for years eventually runs without thought. The integration went from something you performed to something you are. That's why the work went quiet. It didn't stop. It went subterranean and became the ground you walk on instead of the thing you carry. And watch what this produces, because it's the strangest and most beautiful part. You start to notice, after the fact, that you handled something with a wisdom you didn't consciously summon. An old trigger fired, and you were already level before you decided to be. A situation that would have wrecked you a year ago resolved itself through you without a struggle, and you only registered afterward that the old you never even showed up. The responses that used to require your whole conscious will now issue automatically from the integrated self. You're not doing the work anymore. The work is doing you, and that shift from effortful practice to effortless being is the clearest marker that the loud stage is genuinely behind you. But it's also the point where the second sign opens onto the third, the one that unsettles people most, the patterns. The third sign is the one that either deepens your understanding or destroys it, depending entirely on how you read it. You start noticing patterns you can't explain. Jung called it synchronicity, and I need to handle it precisely because this is exactly where people lose the thread and fall into fantasy. Here's what actually happens. You think of someone and they surface that week. You're wrestling with a specific question and the answer arrives from an unrelated direction. A conversation, a book, a chance remark that lands with uncanny relevance. Meaningful coincidences seem to cluster around you in a way they never did before, and the temptation, the trap, is to conclude that the universe has begun personally arranging events on your behalf, that you've unlocked some cosmic favor, that reading feels profound, and it is the beginning of self-deception. Here is the grounded truth, the one Jung's quote actually pointed to. The patterns were always there. What changed is your perception. For years, your unintegrated psyche was consuming enormous bandwidth, managing internal conflict, suppressing the shadow, defending the persona, running the anxious background noise of a self at war with itself. That consumption narrowed your attention to a survival tunnel. You literally could not perceive the wider field of meaning around you because your processing was spent elsewhere. When the integration completes and the internal war ends, that bandwidth is freed, and your perception widens dramatically. You begin registering connections, relevancies, and patterns that were present all along but invisible to a mind at war. Synchronicity, correctly understood, is not the universe changing. It's your perception clearing enough to see the meaning that was always running underneath. And there's a second, entirely grounded mechanism underneath the coincidences too. The integrated self acts differently. It's more attuned, more present, more attractive to genuine opportunity and connection, and it makes choices the fragmented self couldn't. So more meaningful things genuinely do happen, not because reality bent for you, but because a whole person moves through the world in a way that generates them. You think of the right person and reach out, because you're finally attuned enough to act on the impulse. The answer arrives because your cleared perception was finally open to receive it. The pattern is real. The cause is you, your widened perception and your changed action, not a cosmos playing favorites. Hold that line, because the moment you cross it, you leave psychology and enter a fantasy that will quietly unmake everything you built, which is exactly the danger the next sign walks you toward. The fourth sign is the one that hurts even though it shouldn't. People from the old life drift away, and, this is the strange part, without a fight. In the loud years, losing people was dramatic. There were fallings out, confrontations, the sharp pain of relationships ending in conflict. But in this stage, the leaving is quieter. People simply drift. The calls space out and then stop. The friendships thin without anyone declaring anything. And the strangest part, the part that makes you wonder if you've gone cold, is that you don't fight it. You feel the drift happening and feel almost nothing but a quiet, clean acceptance, and then you feel guilty for how little you feel. Here's the mechanism, and it's the completion of everything the loud work started. In the loud years, you were still partly attached to the old relationships because you were still partly the old self. The persona those friendships were built on hadn't fully dissolved yet. Now it has, and relationships anchored to a self that no longer exists don't require a dramatic ending. They simply lose their anchor and float away because there's nothing left holding them in place. There's no fight because there's no longer a live attachment to fight over. The version of you those people were connected to has quietly finished leaving, and both of you feel it, and neither of you needs to make it a scene. Sit with the discomfort here, because it names something you've been afraid of. Part of what scares you about the drift is the ease of it. You thought becoming whole would make you warmer, more connected, and instead you're watching people fall away and finding you don't mind. You wonder if the work made you cold. It didn't. What you're feeling isn't coldness. It's the absence of the desperate attachment that used to make you cling to relationships long past their truth. You're not less loving. You're less needy, and from the outside, before you understand it, those two can feel identical. But here is exactly where that feeling becomes dangerous, because I don't need anyone anymore is one short step from a lie that can hollow out your entire life. And that lie is the next thing I have to stop you on. Here is the reversal that saves this whole stage from becoming a beautiful delusion, and almost no one teaching this material will give it to you, because the fantasy sells and the correction doesn't. Every sign I've described has a counterfeit that looks identical from the inside and is its exact opposite in truth. The silence can be genuine completion, Or it can be avoidance, a person who stopped doing the work because it got hard and rebranded the quitting as arrival. The work happening as you can be real integration, or it can be a story you tell to stop examining yourself, mistaking autopilot for enlightenment. The patterns can be widened perception, or they can be magical thinking, a mind that has started seeing cosmic messages in random noise and calling its delusion depth. And the drift can be the falling away of the false, or it can be avoidance dressed as transcendence, a wounded person cutting everyone off and calling their isolation a spiritual stage. Each real sign has a fake twin, and the fake twins are seductive precisely because they feel more profound than the truth. The deepest counterfeit of all is what's called spiritual bypassing, using the language of transformation to avoid the actual work rather than to complete it. It's the person who declares they've transcended their triggers when they've really just repressed them, who reads every coincidence as a sign the universe endorses their choices and uses that to stop taking responsibility for their decisions, who interprets the drift of relationships as proof of their elevation rather than asking honestly whether they're pushing people away out of fear. Bypassing feels exactly like the real deeper stage, calm, detached above it all. But underneath, it's not integration, it's an escape hatch with incense burning over it. And the cruelest part is that it can look, to the person inside it, more spiritually advanced than the genuine article, because the genuine article stays humble and the counterfeit crowns itself. So here is how you tell them apart. And you must install this, or the entire stage will betray you into fantasy. The real, deeper stage makes you more grounded, not less, more present in your actual life, more responsible for your choices, more capable of real intimacy with the few who remain. It reads synchronicity as widened perception and still takes full ownership of its decisions. It watches relationships drift and stays warmly open to the real ones. The counterfeit makes you less grounded, more detached from reality, less accountable, using cosmic language to avoid ordinary responsibility, and increasingly unable to connect with anyone. Ask yourself the brutal question: is my newfound peace making me more engaged with my real life and more capable of love? Or is it floating me away from responsibility, relationships, and the ground under my feet? Grounded and open is the real stage. Detached and drifting is the delusion. One is integration. The other is a very calm way of coming apart. Get this right, and the deeper stage is the rarest and most real thing a person can reach. Get it wrong, and you'll spend years in an elegant fantasy, mistaking your own dissociation for awakening. The signs are real. Whether they mark completion or self-deception depends entirely on whether you stay honest, which brings us to what's actually being born in you when you do. The final sign is the one the thumbnail points at. Then this starts, and it's the strangest and most important of all. A part of you that you thought you'd buried begins, quietly, to speak again. Here's what unsettles people about it. You did all that work to integrate the shadow, to resolve the wounds, to become whole. And now, in the silence, something old is stirring again. An old passion you'd abandoned, a part of your nature you'd suppressed to survive, to fit, to keep the peace. A voice you thought the work had put to rest is speaking, and your first fear is that you're regressing, that the buried thing clawing its way back means the integration failed and you're returning to who you were. Here's the truth, and it's the whole point of the deeper stage. What's returning is not the wound. It's the gift the wound was sitting on. Everything you buried in the shadow wasn't only pain. Jung understood that the shadow holds your disowned power, your suppressed vitality, the parts of your nature that were too much, too intense, too alive for the environment you had to survive in. In the loud years, you cleared away the pain that was guarding those parts. And now, in the silence, with the wound resolved, the buried vitality is free to return, not as a regression to the old self, but as the reclamation of the aliveness you had to exile to get through your life. The part speaking again isn't the wounded child. It's the original force that got buried underneath the wound, coming home now that the ground is finally safe. This is what starts when the work ends. Not more healing, but a life. The clearing was never the destination. It was the excavation that made room for the reclaimed self to finally live. And here's the truth the whole video was built to deliver. The end of shadow work is not an end. It's the moment the work goes silent, goes automatic, goes subterranean, and in the space that opens up, your perception clears, the false connections fall away, and the vital self you buried a lifetime ago begins to speak. What felt like regression was reclamation. What felt like the engine dying was the engine reaching silent speed. What felt like the end was, exactly as Jung understood, the first day of a stranger and deeper stage, the stage where you stop doing the work and start, finally, living as the whole person the work was always building toward. And understand what that makes you now. Not healed exactly, inhabited. A person whose integration has become so complete it runs without effort, whose perception has cleared enough to see the meaning that was always there, whose buried vitality has come home, and who can tell this is the part that matters, the difference between genuine depth and the fantasy that mimics it, because you stayed honest through the silence. The world will feel that in you and reach for the nearest word. They'll feel the groundedness, the uncanny attunement, the way you seem to move with something they can't name, and they'll call it confidence. They won't know it was the long silence after the loud work, the stage almost no one recognizes, that built it. So if this landed, if you recognize the silence, the patterns, the drift, and the part of you starting to speak again, and you understand now that none of it was regression, comment the word begun. Not as a boast, as a marker in time, the moment you stopped mistaking the silence for the end and understood it was the beginning of the deeper stage. And if you want to keep living from this place, deeper into individuation, synchronicity, depth psychology, and the real architecture of the stage after the work ends, then subscribe, because this is the only place that treats this silence as a beginning to be understood, not a regression to be feared or a fantasy to indulge. This is the room for the ones who reach the stage the loud years were only preparing them for. Picture it a year from now, already true. The strange signs that once frightened you will have become simply how you live. A cleared perception, a grounded attunement, a life increasingly arranged around what's real and emptied of what never was. The vital part that came home will have grown into the center of who you are. The thing you buried now, leading the life it was always meant to lead. You'll move through the world whole, awake, and quietly astonished at how much of it you couldn't see before. And people will assume you were simply born this way. They won't know there was a silence and that you didn't run from it. And whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. What's begun in the silence has a next chapter, and you don't want to meet it unprepared. Trust me. I'll see you there. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.